Commander Zextera had lived through 7 galactic wars, witnessed the fall of 3 civilizations, and commanded fleets that could crack planets. In his 4 centuries of military service across the Andromeda Coalition, he had seen species that could phase through matter, beings of pure energy, and warriors whose exoskeletons could deflect antimatter blasts. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the sight of a human soldier named Marcus Chun standing in the breach of their fortress walls, surrounded by 50 Vorthan death commandos, calmly reloading his primitive kinetic weapon while humming what he called classic rock. The humans had only joined the galactic community 18 months ago. Their technology was laughably primitive. Their ships held together with what they cheerfully called duct tape and hope, and their weapons still used chemical propellants like something from the dark ages of space exploration. So why? Zextera wondered as he watched Marcus tear through enemy lines with nothing but determination and what humans call spite. Why did every veteran warrior in the galaxy speak of humans in hushed, terrified whispers? He was about to find out. And once he did, he would never look at war or peace the same way again. The emergency klaxon screamed through the command deck of the Coalition dreadnought Eternal Vigilance as Commander Zextera studied the tactical display with growing dread. Red indicators blinked across the holographic star map, each one representing a fallen outpost on the rim world of Keth Prime. The Vorthan Dominion had launched a surprise attack 3 days ago, and their advance seemed unstoppable. Zextera's 4 arms worked across the command console with practiced efficiency, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the bridge's harsh lighting. As a member of the Kethmori species, he had served the Coalition for longer than most humans had been spacefaring. His tactical experience was legendary, his strategic mind unmatched. Yet now, facing the might of the Vorthan war machine, he felt the cold touch of inevitable defeat. "Sir," his communications officer, a crystalline being named Veltar, chimed in harmonious tones. "Incoming transmission from Coalition High Command." The central hologram flickered to life, revealing Admiral Thorn, a distinguished Altarian with silver skin and for eyes that never missed a detail. His expression was grim as he began speaking. "Commander Zextera, I won't lie to you. Keth Prime is lost unless we can hold the Tartarus Ridge Fortress Complex for another 72 hours. Reinforcements are en route, but they won't arrive in time unless someone can buy us that time." Zextera's mandibles clicked in acknowledgement. "Understood, Admiral. However, our current forces are insufficient. The Vorthans have deployed 3 full battle legions, including their elite death commandos. My tactical analysis suggests we have less than a 12% chance of holding the ridge." Admiral Thorne's expression shifted slightly. "That's why I'm sending you additional support. A human unit." Silence fell across the bridge. Zextera felt his secondary hearts skip a beat. Humans, the newcomers, the species that had emerged from a small blue world on the galaxy's outer spiral arm just 18 months ago, claiming they wanted to help out and do their part for galactic peace. "Admiral, with respect," Zextera began carefully, "the humans have no combat experience against Vorthan forces. Their technology is primitive. Their understanding of galactic warfare is minimal at best. Nevertheless, they volunteered," Admiral Thorne replied. "Captain Sarah Martinez and her unit are already aboard the transport ship Defiant Hope. They'll reach your position in 6 hours." The transmission ended, leaving Zextera staring at the star map. He had heard stories about humans, of course. Everyone in the Coalition had. They were said to be unpredictable, emotional, and reckless. Some whispered darker things, that there was something fundamentally different about them, something that made even veteran warriors nervous. But Zextera had dismissed such talk as superstition. How dangerous could a species be that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel? 6 hours later, he was about to find out. The transport ship Defiant Hope docked with the Eternal Vigilance with what Zextera could only describe as aggressive enthusiasm. Where most species approached docking procedures with careful precision, The human ship seemed to slam into the docking bay like it was in a hurry to start a fight. Zexthara made his way to the shuttle bay, expecting to meet perhaps 24 human soldiers with their primitive equipment. What he found instead made him pause. 47 humans had disembarked, but they didn't look like any military unit he had ever seen. They wore armor that seemed to be a patchwork of different technologies, some pieces clearly human-made, others obviously scavenged from various alien sources. Their weapons were an even stranger mix, traditional human kinetic rifles alongside energy weapons from a dozen different species. But it wasn't their equipment that gave Zexthara pause. It was the humans themselves. They moved with a casual confidence that bordered on arrogance. Several were laughing at some shared joke. Others were checking their weapons with the kind of easy familiarity that spoke of long experience. One was actually eating something while examining a tactical datapad. At the front of the group stood a woman who could only be Captain Sarah Martinez. She was smaller than Zexthara had expected. Most humans were, compared to his species' imposing height, but there was something in her dark eyes that made him instinctively straighten his posture. "Commander Zexthara?" she asked, extending a hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Captain Sarah Martinez, 1st Volunteer Regiment. Heard you folks might need a hand with some uninvited guests." Zexthara accepted the handshake, noting the surprising strength in the human's grip. "Captain Martinez, I must say, your arrival is unexpected. We weren't aware that humans had organized military units." Captain Martinez laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both warm and slightly predatory. "Military units? Commander, we're not military. We're volunteers. Most of us were civilians before we decided the galaxy looked like it could use some help." This information was deeply troubling to Zexthara. "Civilians? Captain, we face elite Vorthan death commandos. These are warriors bred for combat, trained from birth, enhanced with military-grade cybernetics. They have conquered 17 worlds in the past decade alone." "Yeah, we heard," said another human, this one a tall male with intricate tattoos covering his arms. "Sounds like they need someone to teach them some manners." "Sergeant Chun is right," Captain Martinez added. "We've reviewed the tactical situation. Honestly, it looks like fun." Zexthara felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. Fun. These humans thought that facing the most feared warriors in the galaxy sounded like fun. "Captain, perhaps you don't understand the gravity of the situation. The Vorthans have overwhelming numerical superiority. Their weapons can cut through most known armor like it's paper. Their tactics are flawless. In 3 centuries of warfare, no one has ever successfully defended against a full Vorthan assault." Captain Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "Good thing we're not no one then." Before Zexthara could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. His communications officer's voice echoed through the bay. "Commander, Vorthan forces are beginning their assault on Tartarus Ridge. We need to deploy immediately." The journey to Keth Prime's surface took 2 hours aboard the Coalition dropships. Zexthara spent most of that time briefing the humans on Vorthan tactics, capabilities, and known weaknesses. The humans listened politely, asked thoughtful questions, and made notes on their primitive paper notebooks. What concerned Zexthara was their complete lack of apparent fear or nervousness. His own troops, veteran Coalition soldiers all, were running final equipment checks, reviewing battle protocols, and maintaining the focused calm that came before combat. The humans, by contrast, seemed to be treating the whole thing like an outing. Several were playing cards. Others were sharing food from small packages they called MREs and complaining about the taste. One group was singing something they called a cadence that seemed to involve a lot of profanity and references to violence. "Captain Martinez," Zexthara said eventually, "are your soldiers always this relaxed before combat?" "Oh, this isn't relaxed," she replied with a grin. "This is them getting excited. You should see them when they're actually calm." The dropships landed at Tartarus Ridge as the first Vorthan artillery began falling in the distance. The fortress complex was a massive structure built into the mountainside, its weapons platforms and shield generators capable of controlling the entire valley below. If the Vorthans took it, they would have a clear path to the planetary capital. Zextera had positioned his forces according to standard defensive doctrine. Heavy weapons teams on the upper ramparts, infantry units in prepared positions throughout the complex, and reserve forces held back for counterattacks. It was a textbook deployment that had served the coalition well in hundreds of battles. The humans, however, had other ideas. "With respect, Commander," Captain Martinez said as she reviewed his tactical display, "this isn't going to work." "I beg your pardon? You're fighting their kind of fight," she explained patiently. Traditional positions, established fields of fire, predictable defensive patterns. The Vorthans have been beating that kind of setup for decades. Zextera felt his confidence wavering. "Captain, these defensive positions have been mathematically optimized based on 3 centuries of military doctrine. The overlapping fields of fire create kill zones that no attacking force can and will cross," interrupted Sergeant Shun, who had been studying the fortress layout on his own datapad. "Look, Commander, no disrespect to your military doctrine, but the Vorthans didn't conquer 17 worlds by walking into kill zones. They conquered them by finding ways around kill zones." "Then what do you suggest?" Zextera asked, though he was beginning to suspect he wouldn't like the answer. Captain Martinez smiled, and Zextera finally understood why some species found humans unsettling. There was something predatory in that expression, something that spoke of an entirely different approach to warfare. "We suggest you let us do what humans do best," she said, "which is improvise." The first Vorthan probing attack came at dawn, just as Zextera's tactical computers had predicted. 3 squads of Vorthan scouts, moving with the fluid grace that made them so feared in close combat, approached the fortress perimeter using standard infiltration techniques. Zextera watched from the command center as his sensors tracked their movement. Everything was proceeding according to established patterns. The scouts would test the defenses, identify weak points, and report back to their commanders. Then would come the artillery bombardment, followed by the main assault. What happened instead defied all military logic. The human volunteers had positioned themselves throughout the fortress in seemingly random locations. They weren't in prepared defensive positions. They weren't following any recognizable tactical doctrine. Several were actually outside the fortress perimeter entirely, hiding in locations that Zextera's computers classified as tactically unsound. When the Vorthan scouts reached what should have been the outer defensive line, the humans opened fire. But they didn't fire from fixed positions. Instead, they moved constantly and unpredictably, using the fortress's own structure against the attackers. They fired from windows, then disappeared. They popped up behind walls that shouldn't have provided cover. They used maintenance tunnels, service corridors, and what appeared to be deliberate structural damage to create new firing positions on the fly. The Vorthan scouts, trained to counter traditional military tactics, found themselves facing an enemy that didn't follow any recognizable pattern. Where they expected overlapping fields of fire, they found seemingly random shots from unexpected angles. Where they expected coordinated defensive positions, they found individual humans who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. "What are they doing?" Zextera muttered, watching the tactical display with growing confusion. His tactical officer, a methodical being named Horth, was equally puzzled. "Sir, the humans appear to be improvising their defensive positions in real time. That's not possible. Defensive positions must be carefully planned and coordinated to be effective." On the display, they watched as Sergeant Shin suddenly appeared on a rampart that should have been empty, fired a 3-round burst that dropped 2 Vorthan scouts, then vanished again before their return fire could find him. Moments later, he reappeared 2 levels down and 30 meters to the left. "Sir," Horth said slowly, "I don't think the humans received the same tactical training as the rest of us. The Vorthan probing attack, which should have provided valuable intelligence about the fortress defenses, instead resulted in the complete elimination of the scouting force with 0 human casualties. Worse, from the Vorthan perspective, they had learned nothing about how the humans would defend the fortress. because the humans weren't defending it in any way that made sense. 3 hours later, the main Vorthan assault began. 500 Vorthan death commandos, supported by armored vehicles and air support, began their advance on Tartarus Ridge. It was a textbook assault, executed with the precision that had made the Vorthan military the terror of the galaxy. Zextharal watched from the command center as artillery rounds began falling on predetermined targets. Shield generators sparked and failed. Weapon emplacements exploded in showers of debris. The outer defensive walls cracked under the relentless bombardment. Everything was going exactly as the Vorthans had planned, which was when the humans really began to fight. Instead of taking cover from the artillery barrage, several human volunteers actually moved closer to the impact zones. Zextharal watched in horror as they deliberately exposed themselves to enemy fire, only to vanish moments before incoming round arrived. They're coordinating the artillery strikes, his tactical officer realized. They're using themselves as spotters to predict where the next rounds will fall. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. As Zextharal watched, he realized that the humans weren't just avoiding the artillery. They were using it. When Vorthan rounds destroyed a section of the outer wall, humans immediately moved to occupy the rubble pile, turning the damaged fortification into a new firing position. When an explosion opened a hole in the fortress floor, humans dropped through it to attack Vorthan forces from below. They were treating the destruction of their own defenses as an opportunity. "Sir," Horth said, his voice strained, "the humans appear to be adapting to the bombardment." Adapting how? They're using the damage to create new tactical advantages. On the display, they watched as a human soldier named Private Rodriguez used a blast crater as cover while engaging a Vorthan fire team. When the crater became too exposed, she triggered a small explosive that collapsed part of the fortress wall, creating a new covered approach that led directly behind the Vorthan position. That's not possible," Zextharal whispered. "You can't plan for random artillery damage. You can't incorporate enemy fire into your defensive strategy." Captain Martinez's voice crackled over the communication system. "Commander, this is Martinez. We're ready for the main assault. Just keep your people clear of the kill zones." "Captain, the Vorthans are already attacking. There are 500 of them advancing on your position." "Perfect," came the reply, and Zextharal could hear the smile in her voice. Finally, a fair fight. Fair fight? Zextharal stared at his tactical display. 47 humans against 500 Vorthan death commandos. And Captain Martinez thought it was a fair fight? The Vorthan ground assault reached the fortress perimeter exactly on schedule. The death commandos moved with the fluid coordination that had conquered worlds, their energy weapons cutting through defensive barriers like they weren't there. What they encountered instead of organized resistance was chaos. Not the chaos of a broken defense, but something far more disturbing: controlled chaos. Directed chaos. Chaos that seemed to have rules that only the humans understood. The first indication that something was wrong came when the lead Vorthan squad reached what should have been the main defensive line and found it empty. Not abandoned, empty by design. The defensive positions were there, perfectly maintained and fully stocked with ammunition. They just had no one in them. The Vorthans moved forward cautiously, their enhanced senses scanning for hidden enemies. Their tactical computers analyzed the fortress layout, identifying the most likely positions for defenders to retreat to. That was when the humans attacked. But they didn't attack from the positions the Vorthans expected. They didn't even attack from positions that appeared on any tactical display. Instead, they seemed to materialize from the fortress itself. A Vorthan death commando would be advancing through a corridor that sensors confirmed was clear, only to have a human soldier drop from a ventilation shaft directly behind him. Another would be scanning a room for threats when a section of floor would suddenly give way, revealing a human who had apparently been waiting in the substructure. The humans weren't following any recognizable tactical doctrine because they weren't following any doctrine at all. They were making it up as they went along, using their own creativity and the fortress's architecture as weapons. Contact. Multiple hostiles in Section 7. came a Vorthan voice over intercepted communications. Section 7 is secure, came the reply from Vorthan Command. No enemy forces detected. Negative. We have 3 human soldiers engaging from. I don't know where they are. They're inside the walls. Zextara watched the battle unfold with growing amazement. The humans had somehow turned the entire fortress into a weapon. They weren't defending specific positions. They were defending the entire structure by making every part of it dangerous. Sergeant Chun appeared to be everywhere at once, popping up in locations that should have been impossible to reach, engaging Vorthan forces with his primitive kinetic rifle, then vanishing before return fire could find him. Other humans were using similar tactics, creating the impression that the fortress itself was attacking the invaders. "Sir," Horth said, his voice filled with something that might have been awe, "the humans appear to have rewritten the tactical situation." "What do you mean?" "They're not fighting a defensive battle," Horth explained. "They've somehow turned this into an offensive operation conducted from defensive positions." On the display, they watched as Private Rodriguez emerged for what appeared to be solid wall, eliminated 2 Vorthan soldiers with precise shots, then disappeared back into the fortress structure before their comrades could react. "That's impossible," Zextara said. "You can't conduct offensive operations while defending a fixed position." "The humans appear to disagree, sir." As the battle continued, Zextara began to understand why veterans spoke of humans in whispered tones. It wasn't their technology, which was indeed primitive. It wasn't their training, which was minimal compared to other species. It was their approach to warfare itself. They didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like predators. Every human seemed to be operating independently, yet somehow they were perfectly coordinated. They communicated in brief phrases over open channels, using words that seemed to convey complex tactical information. Chundor. Rodriguez stairs. Williams boom. That last one was followed by an explosion that brought down an entire section of corridor on a Vorthan fire team. The humans weren't just adapting to the battle. They were redefining it. Where other species saw obstacles, they saw opportunities. Where others saw destruction, they saw tools. And, most disturbing of all, they seemed to be enjoying themselves. "This is Martinez," came the captain's voice over the comm. "Commander, you might want to have medical teams standing by." "Understood, Captain. Do you have casualties?" "Oh no, not for us," she replied cheerfully. "For them." The Vorthan assault, which should have taken the fortress within 2 hours, instead ground to a halt as the Death Commandos found themselves fighting an enemy that didn't behave like any opponent they had ever faced. And as Zextara watched the impossible battle unfold, he began to understand something that would change his perspective on warfare forever. The humans weren't just fighting the Vorthans. They were having fun doing it. The human plan, as Captain Martinez explained it, was so audacious that Zextara initially assumed he had misunderstood something fundamental about space combat. When he realized that he had understood correctly, he spent several minutes staring at the tactical display in stunned silence. "Let me make certain I comprehend this correctly," he said finally. "You intend to engage a Vorthan battle fleet using civilian transport vessels, cargo ships, and mining equipment." "That's the gist of it," Martinez confirmed, studying the manifest of human vessels currently in the Keth Prime system. "We've got the Defiant Hope, which is basically a converted cargo hauler. The Lucky Strike is a mining ship with some really impressive drilling equipment. The Free Spirit is a passenger transport that the owners modified for long-haul freight. And the Stubborn Mule is, well, nobody's quite sure what the Stubborn Mule is, but it flies and it has some interesting attachments." Zextara examined the vessel specifications with growing horror. The 4 human ships had minimal armor, no military-grade weapons systems, and power plants designed for commercial rather than combat operations. Against a Vorthan battle fleet, they would last approximately 37 seconds. "Captain," he said carefully, "these vessels are not equipped for space combat. They have no shields, no weapons, no expectations," Sergeant Chin interrupted. "That's the important part." "I don't understand." Captain Martinez activated the holographic display, showing the approaching Vorthan fleet in formation. 57 warships arranged in perfect battle order. The massive dreadnought Death Shadow at their center, like a dark star surrounded by deadly satellites. Commander, what do you see when you look at this formation? Zextaros studied the display with his experienced tactical mind. A standard Vorthan battle fleet in hegemon formation. The dreadnought provides heavy fire support, while the cruisers establish overlapping defensive patterns. The destroyers serve as screening elements and fast attack platforms. It's a formation that has conquered entire systems. Right, Martinez agreed. Now, what do you think they expect to face? Based on standard coalition defensive doctrine, a matching formation of military vessels attempting to engage them in conventional fleet action. Exactly. They're prepared for a real battle between real warships, following real tactical principles. Martinez's expression took on that predatory quality that Zextara was learning to associate with human military thinking. So, we're going to give them something completely different. Over the next 2 hours, Zextara watched the humans prepare for what he could only describe as the most insane military operation in galactic history. They weren't modifying their civilian ships for combat. They were modifying them for what they cheerfully called aggressive confusion. The mining ship Lucky Strike had its drilling equipment reconfigured into what Sergeant Shun described as the galaxy's largest and most obnoxious mining laser. The passenger transport Free Spirit was loaded with every piece of debris, spare parts, and junk the humans could find. The cargo hauler Defiant Hope had its holds filled with small explosive charges connected to what appeared to be a completely improvised detonation system. And the mysterious Stubber Mule was equipped with something that Captain Martinez would only describe as a surprise. "Captain," Zextara said as he watched human technicians install what appeared to be a sound system on the Defiant Hope's hull, "I must ask, what is your tactical objective? How do you intend to defeat a Vorthan battle fleet?" "Who said anything about defeating them?" Martinez replied. "We're not trying to win a fleet engagement. We're trying to confuse them long enough for your reinforcements to arrive." "Confuse them?" "Sure. See, the Vorthans are really good at fighting people who fight the way they expect. But they're not used to dealing with people who refuse to follow the rules." Before Zextara could ask what rules they intended to break, alarms began sounding throughout the system. The Vorthan fleet had arrived. From the command center of the Eternal Vigilance, Zextara watched the enemy fleet drop out of hyperspace with a precision that made Vorthan naval operations legendary. They emerged in perfect formation, immediately establishing sensor locks on all coalition vessels, and beginning their approach with the methodical confidence of predators who had never encountered effective resistance. "This is War Master Thekvor," came the transmission from the Vorthan flagship. "Coalition forces, you are ordered to surrender unconditionally. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of all military and civilian vessels in this system." Captain Martinez opened a response channel. "War Master Thekvor, this is Captain Sarah Martinez of the Human Volunteer Fleet. We respectfully decline your generous offer." There was a long pause before Thekvor responded. "Human Volunteer Fleet? Our sensors detect only 4 civilian vessels. Do you mock us?" "Oh no, War Master," Martinez replied cheerfully. "We're about to teach you something about human naval doctrine." "You have no naval doctrine," Thekvor snarled. "You have no fleet. You have no weapons capable of threatening Vorthan warships." "You're absolutely right," Martinez agreed. "Isn't it exciting?" The first indication that something unprecedented was about to happen came when the human ships began moving. But they didn't move in any formation that appeared in any tactical database. Instead, they scattered in seemingly random directions, accelerating at angles that made no strategic sense. "Sir," Horth reported from the sensor station, "the human vessels appear to be diverging." "Diverging how?" "They're not maintaining any kind of formation. They're heading in 4 completely different directions." Zextara studied the tactical display with growing confusion. The fundamental principle of fleet combat was mutual support, ships working together to maximize their combined firepower while protecting each other from enemy attacks. By scattering, The human vessels were eliminating any possibility of coordinated action. It was tactical suicide, which was when the Lucky Strike began its attack run. The mining ship, designed for breaking apart asteroids, accelerated directly toward the Vorthen formation while broadcasting what appeared to be human music at maximum volume. The song, which Private Rodriguez had helpfully identified as Thunderstruck by something called AC/DC, echoed across every communication frequency in the system. What are they doing? Thekvor's voice crackled across the comm, no longer carrying its previous confidence. The Lucky Strike reached weapons range and opened fire. But instead of targeting Vorthen warships, it began drilling holes in empty space while continuing to broadcast its musical selection at a volume that overloaded most communication systems. "They're not shooting at us," came a confused report from one of the Vorthen cruisers. "They're shooting at nothing." That was when the Free Spirit made its contribution to the battle. The passenger transport, loaded with debris and junk, began ejecting its cargo in seemingly random directions. But Zexthara quickly realized that the debris pattern wasn't random at all. It was designed to create a cloud of radar-reflecting obstacles that would interfere with Vorthen targeting systems. "Sir," Horth announced, "the human vessels are deploying countermeasures." "What kind of countermeasures?" "Apparently, garbage." The Vorthen fleet, trained to counter sophisticated electronic warfare systems and advanced defensive measures, found their targeting computers struggling to lock onto anything through the cloud of spinning metal debris, broken machinery, and what appeared to be human furniture. "This is impossible." Thekvor's voice had risen to a screech. "You cannot conduct naval warfare with mining equipment and refuse." "Funny thing about impossible," came Captain Martinez's voice from the Defiant Hope. "Humans have never been very good with that concept." The cargo hauler Defiant Hope chose that moment to demonstrate human creativity at its finest. Instead of engaging the Vorthen fleet directly, it began releasing small explosive charges from its cargo holds. The charges were equipped with tiny thrusters that allowed them to maneuver independently, creating what appeared to be a swarm of autonomous mines. Except they weren't targeting Vorthen ships. Instead, they were creating elaborate patterns of explosions that seemed to serve no tactical purpose whatsoever. "What is the strategic objective of this display?" Thekfor demanded. "Oh, those aren't for strategy," Martinez replied. "Those are for morale." The explosive light show was indeed impressive, creating brilliant patterns across space that spelled out messages in multiple human languages. Most were too crude for Zexthara's translation protocols to process, but he gathered that they were generally insulting toward Vorthen heritage, intelligence, and personal hygiene. The Vorthen fleet, faced with an enemy that refused to follow any recognizable tactical doctrine, began to falter. Their formation started to waver as individual ship commanders tried to adapt to threats that their computers couldn't categorize. "All vessels, maintain formation," Thekfor ordered. "Do not be distracted by these theatrics." That was when the stubborn mule revealed its surprise. The mysterious fourth human vessel had been lurking at the edge of the combat zone, apparently doing nothing while its three companions created chaos throughout the Vorthen fleet. But as Zexthara watched, the stubborn mule suddenly accelerated directly toward the Vorthen flagship. "Sir," Horth reported, "the fourth human vessel is on a collision course with the Death Shadow." "A ramming attack." Zexthara felt something like admiration. That's actually a legitimate tactic. But the stubborn mule didn't ram the Vorthen flagship. Instead, at the last possible moment, it veered away and released something that Zexthara's sensors couldn't identify. "What do they deploy?" he asked. "Unknown, sir. It appears to be some kind of boarding pod." The object attached itself to the Death Shadow's hull with magnetic grapples, and almost immediately, alarms began sounding from the Vorthen flagship. "Intruder alert!" came panicked voices from Vorthen communications. "Unknown entities have boarded the ship." "How many?" Thekfor demanded. "We were not sure, War Master. Our internal sensors are malfunctioning." "Then, conduct a visual search." "We tried, War Master." The intruders appeared to be moving through the ventilation systems. Zextera felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. The humans had somehow managed to board the most heavily defended warship in the Vorthan fleet, and they were using the same tactics that had proven so effective at Tartarus Ridge, moving through spaces that weren't designed for occupation, striking from unexpected angles, creating confusion rather than following conventional boarding procedures. All vessels. Thekvor's voice was becoming increasingly frantic, close on the flagship. We have been boarded by human infiltrators. But the Vorthan fleet's attempts to respond to the boarding action were hampered by the ongoing chaos created by the other human vessels. The Lucky Strike continued its drilling operations, creating a maze of energy beams that interfered with Vorthan sensors. The Free Spirit had released a second wave of debris that was now orbiting the battle zone in complex patterns. And the Defiant Hope was still creating its explosive light show while broadcasting what appeared to be human victory songs. "Sir," Horth announced, "we're receiving a transmission from inside the Vorthan flagship." "From the boarding party?" "It appears so, sir." The communication channel crackled to life, revealing the voice of someone Zextera didn't recognize, presumably one of the humans who had somehow infiltrated the Death Shadow. "This is Corporal Williams," came the cheerful voice. "Just want to let everyone know that Vorthan starship design is really interesting. They've got all these maintenance tunnels and service corridors that nobody seems to be guarding." "Corporal Williams," Captain Martinez responded from the Defiant Hope. "Are you sightseeing over there?" "Oh no, ma'am. I'm working. But you should see their engine room. It's got all these clearly labeled control panels. Really user-friendly design." A new alarm began sounding from the Vorthan flagship, the distinctive tone that indicated engineering problems. "The humans have reached our engine compartment," came a terrified voice from the Death Shadow. They're reading our instruction manuals." "Stop them. Take Fuas Klimt. We can't find them, War Master. They keep disappearing into the infrastructure." On the tactical display, Zextera watched as the Vorthan flagship's energy output began fluctuating wildly. The humans had somehow gained access to the ship's primary systems and were apparently experimenting with them. "Corporal Williams," Martinez called, "what exactly are you doing over there?" "Well, ma'am, these Vorthans have some really sophisticated power routing systems. I'm just seeing what happens if I reroute power from the weapons arrays to the waste management systems." The Death Shadow's main gun suddenly went offline as raw sewage began founaining from its hull breaches. "That," Williams continued with obvious satisfaction, "is what happens." The Vorthan fleet, faced with an enemy that had somehow turned their flagship into a flying sanitation disaster while conducting the most unorthodox fleet action in recorded history, finally broke formation entirely. Individual ship commanders began making their own decisions, some trying to assist their flagship, others attempting to engage the human vessels that continued to dart around the combat zone like caffeinated insects. "Sir," Horth reported, "Coalition reinforcements are entering the system." Zextera looked up to see Admiral Thorne's battle fleet dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation. 12 Coalition dreadnoughts, 36 cruisers, and a full screening force of destroyers and support vessels. A fleet that could have defeated the Vorthans in conventional combat. But they weren't needed for conventional combat. The Vorthan fleet scattered across the system in complete disarray, their flagship disabled and leaking waste products, their formation broken by 4 civilian vessels using tactics that violated every principle of space warfare, surrendered without firing another shot. As Admiral Thorne's ships moved to secure the defeated Vorthan fleet, Zextera stood in the command center, trying to process what he had witnessed. In the space of 6 hours, 47 human volunteers had redefined ground warfare. In the space of 2 hours, 4 human civilian ships had revolutionized his understanding of naval combat. "Commander," Captain Martinez called from the Defiant Hope, "permission to begin recovery operations?" "Recovery operations? We need to pick up Corporal Williams and his team. Also, the Lucky Strike needs to refuel, and I think the Free Spirit is out of garbage." As the human vessels began their recovery operations, Admiral Thorne's image appeared on the holographic display. His four eyes were wide with an expression that Zexthara had never seen on the distinguished admiral's face. "Commander Zexthara," Admiral Thorne said slowly, "I've read the preliminary battle reports. They make no tactical sense." "No, sir, they don't. The humans engaged a superior enemy fleet using mining equipment, refuse, and what appears to have been musical performances." "Yes, sir." "And they won." "Yes, sir." Admiral Thorne was quiet for a long moment. "Commander, I've been conducting fleet operations for 2 centuries. I've studied every major naval engagement in galactic history. I've written 3 textbooks on space combat doctrine." "Yes, sir." "And I have absolutely no idea how to explain what just happened here." Before Zexthara could respond, another voice crackled over the communication system. War Master Thekvor, calling from his disabled flagship. "Coalition Command," the Vorthan leader said, his voice carrying a mixture of defeat and bewilderment. "I formally surrender my fleet to your humans." "The entire Coalition fleet appreciates your surrender, War Master," Admiral Thorne replied diplomatically. "No," Thekvor interrupted. "You misunderstand. I don't surrender to the Coalition. I surrender specifically to the humans. They have demonstrated combat capabilities that exceed our ability to comprehend or counter." Admiral Thorne looked to Zexthara, who could only shrug his 4 shoulders in a gesture that conveyed his own complete bewilderment. "War Master," Admiral Thorne said carefully, "the humans are part of the Coalition. You surrender to all of us." "Admiral," came Captain Martinez's voice, breaking into the conversation. "If I may make a suggestion?" "Please, Captain." "War Master Thekvor, would you and your commanders like to join us for coffee? We're having a little post-battle discussion, and we'd be happy to explain our tactical thinking." There was a long pause before Thekvor responded. You wish to explain your tactics?" "Sure. It's not really complicated once you understand the basic principles." Another pause. "What basic principles?" "Well," Martinez said thoughtfully, "the main principle is that there are no basic principles. Everything else follows from that." 6 hours later, Zexthara found himself in the most surreal military debriefing of his career. The main conference room aboard the Eternal Vigilance was filled with Coalition officers, Vorthan War Masters, and human volunteers, all sitting around the same table drinking what the humans insisted on calling coffee, while Captain Martinez explained human military doctrine. "See, the thing about rules," she was saying to a group of Vorthan commanders who were taking notes with the desperate intensity of students trying to pass an impossible exam, "is that they're really just suggestions. And suggestions only work if everybody agrees to follow them." War Master Thekvor, his massive frame hunched over a cup of coffee that looked ridiculously small in his clawed hands, nodded slowly. "But without rules, how do you coordinate your forces? How do you predict enemy actions? How do you plan operations?" "We don't," Sergeant Shin replied cheerfully. "We just sort of figure it out as we go along." "That's chaos," protested Subcommander Rex Tau, a younger Vorthan whose military education was clearly struggling to process human concepts. "Exactly," Private Rodriguez agreed. "Chaos is great. Nobody can predict chaos, which means nobody can plan to counter it." Admiral Thorne, who had remained silent for most of the discussion, finally spoke. "Captain Martinez, while I appreciate the effectiveness of human tactics, surely you must have some underlying strategic framework." Captain Martinez considered this for a moment. "Well, Admiral, I guess our strategic framework is pretty simple. We try to help people who need help, stop people who need stopping, and have as much fun as possible while we're doing it." "That's not a military doctrine," Admiral Thorne said. That's a philosophy." "Same thing, really," Martinez replied with a shrug. Zexthara looked around the room at the assembled military leaders from 3 different species, all trying to understand an approach to warfare that seemed to defy every principle they had ever learned. The humans sat relaxed in their chairs, sharing jokes and stories about the recent battle, as if they had just completed a particularly entertaining sporting event rather than the most significant military engagement in recent galactic history. "Captain," Zextaros said finally, "may I ask a personal question?" "Sure thing, Commander." "Why do you do this? Why do humans volunteer to fight in conflicts that don't directly involve your species? Why do you risk your lives for people you've never met?" Captain Martinez was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Around the table, the other humans had also grown serious. The first time Zextara had seen them without their characteristic humor. "Commander," she said finally, "I think it comes down to something pretty simple. We look around the galaxy, and we see a lot of people who need help. We see bullies picking on smaller species. We see suffering that could be prevented. We see unfairness that could be fixed." She paused to take a sip of coffee, her expression thoughtful. "And then we ask ourselves, if we don't help, who will? If we don't stand up to the bullies, who's going to? If we don't do something about the suffering and the unfairness, who's going to make it better? But surely other species have the same moral obligations," Admiral Thorne interjected. "Maybe," Martinez replied. "But other species also have a lot of really good reasons why they can't help. They have protocols to follow, procedures to observe, proper channels to go through. They have to analyze the situation, get approval from their governments, follow established doctrine." She looked around the room at the assembled military officers. "Humans don't have any of that," she continued. "We don't have established doctrine because we're new here. We don't have proper channels because we haven't built them yet. We don't have protocols because we haven't figured out what works for us. So instead," Sergeant Chin added, "we just help. We see someone who needs assistance. We assist them. We see a problem. We try to fix it. We see a bully. We punch them in the nose." War Master Thekvor, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke. "But that approach should fail. Without proper planning, without established tactics, without coordinated strategy, you should be defeated by any organized military force." "Should be," Martinez agreed with a grin. "But the thing about humans is we're really bad at doing what we should do." As the debriefing continued, Zextarov found himself understanding something that would change his approach to military command for the rest of his career. The humans hadn't succeeded despite their lack of formal doctrine. They had succeeded because of it. Every other species in the galaxy had spent centuries developing military traditions, tactical frameworks, and strategic principles that governed how they approached warfare. Those traditions were powerful tools, but they were also limitations. They defined not only what a species could do, but what it would think to try. Humans, having no such traditions, were free to attempt anything that occurred to them. They could use mining equipment as weapons, garbage as defensive measures, and sewage systems as tactical advantages because no one had ever told them that such approaches were impossible. "Commander Zexara," Admiral Thorne said as the meeting began to wind down, "I'm recommending that the Coalition establish a new military division. A special operations force trained in unconventional tactics. You want to institutionalize human military doctrine? I want to learn from it," Admiral Thorne corrected. "I want our officers to understand that sometimes the best tactical response is the one that no one expects." Captain Martinez overheard the conversation and laughed. "Admiral, I appreciate the thought, but you can't really teach what we do." "Why not?" "Because the moment you turn it into doctrine, it stops working. The moment you establish protocols for unconventional tactics, they become conventional." She stood and stretched, apparently ready to conclude the most important military briefing in galactic history. "The thing that makes human tactics effective isn't the tactics themselves," she explained. "It's the willingness to abandon tactics entirely when the situation calls for it. It's the ability to look at an impossible situation and ask, what if we tried something really stupid instead?" As the meeting dispersed and the various military leaders returned to their ships, Zextarov found himself alone with Captain Martinez in the conference room. "Captain," he said, "I must confess something to you." "What's that, Commander?" "When your forces first arrived, I believed that humans would be a liability in combat. I thought your lack of experience and primitive technology would make you ineffective against professional military forces. Captain Martinez nodded. That's a pretty reasonable assumption. We are inexperienced, and our technology is primitive. But I was wrong about what makes a military force effective. How so? Zexthara considered his words carefully. I believe that effectiveness came from superior equipment, advanced training, and adherence to proven tactical doctrine. But watching your forces in action, I've learned that there's something more important than any of those things, which is the willingness to try, Zexthara said simply. Other species, including my own, have become so focused on doing things correctly that we've forgotten the importance of simply doing things. We analyze and plan and prepare until the moment for action has passed. Captain Martinez smiled. Humans are pretty good at the doing things part. Indeed. And I suspect that's why the galaxy fears you. The galaxy fears us? Oh yes, Zexthara confirmed. I've heard the whispers in the corridors of power, the nervous conversations among military commanders. Everyone is wondering the same thing. What happens when humans become experienced? What happens when you combine your natural creativity with advanced technology and proper training? Captain Martinez was quiet for a moment, considering this. Commander, she said finally, can I tell you something that might set your mind at ease? Please. The thing that makes humans effective in combat, the creativity, the improvisation, the willingness to try anything, those aren't military traits. They're just human traits. We're like this all the time, not just in battle. She gestured toward the viewport, where human civilian ships were already assisting with reconstruction efforts on Keth Prime surface. Right now, there are humans down there helping rebuild the settlements that were damaged in the fighting. They're using the same creativity and improvisation to figure out better ways to construct buildings, more efficient farming techniques, improved transportation systems. Zexthara followed her gaze. So, your unconventional approach isn't limited to warfare? Oh no, Martinez laughed. We're unconventional about everything. We don't follow established doctrine in art, science, philosophy, or anything else either. She headed toward the door, then paused and looked back at him. Commander, the galaxy doesn't need to fear humans becoming better warriors. We're not particularly interested in being warriors at all. What we're interested in is making things better for everyone. As Captain Martinez left the conference room, Zexthara stood alone, looking out at the stars and thinking about the events of the past few days. He had witnessed the most effective military operation of his career, conducted by a force that didn't consider itself military at all. And he finally understood why veterans spoke of humans in whispered, awed tones. It wasn't because humans were feared as conquerors or dreaded as enemies. It was because they represented something that had never existed in the galaxy before. A species whose first instinct, when faced with any problem, was to fix it, not to analyze it, or study it, or form a committee to develop a proper response to it. Just to fix it, by any means necessary, using whatever tools were available, regardless of whether their approach followed established procedures. 3 days later, as Zexthara watched human volunteers working alongside coalition engineers to repair the damage from the recent battle, he received a communication from Admiral Thorne. Commander, the Admiral said, I've been in contact with human leadership about establishing permanent military cooperation between our species. What was their response? Interesting. They said they'd be happy to help whenever we need assistance, but they don't want to establish formal military alliances. Why not? According to their representative, formal alliances create obligations, and obligations create rules, and rules limit options. Admiral Thorne's image paused, his 4 eyes reflecting the same bewilderment that Zexthara had been feeling for days. Commander, the Admiral continued, they want to help us, but only on the condition that we never require them to help us. Zexthara found himself laughing, something he hadn't done in decades of military service. Admiral, that's the most perfectly human response imaginable. How so? They want to maintain their most important tactical advantage, which is The freedom to do something completely unexpected. As Zexteral watched human and coalition personnel working together to restore order to Keth Prime, he realized that the galaxy was about to change in ways that no one could predict. Because for the first time in recorded history, there was a species that refused to be bound by the way things had always been done, and that he thought was both the most terrifying and the most hopeful development in galactic civilization. Fighting alongside humans, he finally understood why the galaxy would never be the same again.